The story follows Alex on a business trip where he ends up staying at an inn filled with eerie and spine-chilling phenomena. What lies behind the mystery of it all? What will Alex's life be like after this? Stay tuned to find out. Sitting alone quietly, Alex sipped a cup of coffee on the balcony, a cigarette resting between his lips as he occasionally took a deep drag, exhaling wisps of white smoke into the night air. His eyes wandered into the distance as though recalling a story buried deep in the past. Suddenly, Alex's body shuddered involuntarily. His heartbeat quickened and his breathing became erratic, spiraling out of control. A sudden chill swept across his back, carrying the dampness of the night fog that crept onto the nape of his neck. At some point, Alex had developed a fear of the dark and of those sudden icy breezes. Perhaps it all began after the horrifying event that had unfolded more than 3 years ago.
Alex, how's the preparation for your business trip to the Cascade Range going?
There's nothing much to prepare. Just a few sets of clothes and some personal essentials, and that's it.
Don't take it lightly. Traveling to the Cascade Range isn't like going to other places. The roads there are tough to navigate. The population is sparse, resources are limited, and some areas don't even have cell phone service.
Oh, please, you've never even been there. Yet you talk like you've lived there your whole life.
That's because you don't watch YouTube much. People make reality shows about traveling to the highlands and exploring those places all the time.
Well, that was years ago when people only ventured into forests and mountains. Things are different now. Everything has developed and modernized everywhere.
The person talking to Alex is John, arguably his closest friend at the company. On days when they weren't in a rush after work, the two would often hang out at local spots together. Hearing what John said, Alex couldn't help but feel a little concerned.
All right, thanks for the reminder. I'll make sure to prepare everything thoroughly so the business trip goes smoothly.
3 days later, driving a four-door BMW, Alex headed straight for the Cascade Range. The distance from his company to the destination was nearly 300 kilometers, and along the way he stopped a few times to ensure he stayed alert. The road became increasingly winding and twisty with each passing mile. As Alex drove further up, he could feel a completely different atmosphere, fresh, cool, and peaceful, a stark contrast to the hustle and bustle of where he lived. Along both sides of the road, rolling hills and towering ancient trees stretched endlessly, casting deep shade over the path. The purpose of Alex's trip was to visit a factory that produces canning and packaging materials. If the factory met the required standards, his company would officially sign a contract, making it one of the suppliers for his food production company. Although the meeting was scheduled for the next day, due to the long distance, Alex decided to arrive a day earlier to arrange his accommodations and have some time to rest. By the time he arrived, it was already afternoon. Instead of heading straight to a hotel, Alex took a leisurely stroll to enjoy the scenery, as he rarely had the opportunity to visit this area. It wasn't until late afternoon, when he was completely exhausted, that Alex finally went into the town center to look for a place to stay. However, after visiting several inns and hotels, he was told that they were fully booked or had prior reservations. The more he searched, the more disappointed he became, until he finally remembered that today was Valentine's Day, the day of love. No wonder all the inns and hotels were fully booked. Having been so focused on his work and career, Alex still didn't have a significant other, so he never really paid attention to these holidays. Because of that, his co-workers had given him the nickname Master Alex at the company. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the darkness had almost swallowed everything up. Up here, Alex felt like the night fell even faster. Tiny drops of night dew had gathered on the leaves, even fogging up the windshield of his car. Time continued to pass, and Alex had nearly checked all the inns and hotels in the surrounding area. He believed that even if he went to other districts, he would likely encounter the same situation. In his mind, he was already considering the possibility of having to sleep overnight in his car. He didn't dare ask to sleep at anyone's house. First, he didn't know anyone, and second, would they trust him enough to let him stay? Plus, there were all the potential troubles, inconveniences, and unpredictable risks. After driving around for a while with his eyes so heavy he felt like he could barely keep them open, Alex suddenly slammed on the brakes when he saw a worn, old sign standing outside a narrow alley. It read, "Peace in faded letters. Looking at the state of the sign, Alex could already guess that the place inside would be just as rundown. However, at this point, he was at his wits' end. All he needed was a bed and a clean, warm mattress to sleep on. Comfort or a nice view didn't matter anymore. Alex rolled down the car window and stuck his head out to get a better look at the phone number. However, the last two digits were torn off, leaving him with no choice but to drive straight into the narrow alley. It was already dark outside, but inside the alley, everything felt even more quiet and desolate. The alley wasn't very wide, and it seemed like it wasn't designed for cars like Alex's. If he met another car coming from the other direction, Alex would definitely have to reverse and back out, as there was only enough space for a motorcycle to squeeze through. On both sides of the alley were old, weathered walls, covered in moss and white phosphorescence that stuck out like the fur of a sheep. Strangely, Alex didn't see any houses in this alley. It felt more like a railroad track leading straight into the heart of the mountains. The night mist grew denser with each passing moment, making his visibility shrink even further. Then, suddenly, in a brief instant, Alex froze in shock as something slammed into the windshield of his car. His heart skipped a beat, and the screeching sound shattered the eerie silence. As he gathered himself and looked closer, his fear grew even more intense. Outside the windshield were a pair of glowing green eyes staring in. He instinctively screamed, only to realize it was an owl, and his fear slowly started to ease. Alex slammed his hand against the windshield, trying to shoo the owl away, but it barely reacted. Its eyes remained fixed on him, wide and unblinking, and Alex could no longer control the sweat pouring from his hands and feet. The owl's gaze was strange. It didn't seem like an ordinary, mindless animal. Its eyes seemed to pierce deeply into his consciousness, sending a chill down his spine. Alex didn't dare move forward any further and quickly shifted the car into reverse. At that moment, unexpectedly, a face suddenly appeared on the side of the car, pressed against the window, and a deep, gravelly voice echoed,
"You're here looking for a place to stay, right?"
The sudden appearance of the other person startled Alex once again. When he looked up, the owl had vanished without a trace. The strange occurrences kept piling up one after another, with no warning, leaving him unable to stay calm. Seeing this, the man continued,
"Are you here looking for a place to stay? I'm the owner of the inn."
Alex nodded instinctively. The man signaled for him to roll down the car window. Then he continued,
"My inn is just a short distance from here. Follow me."
Without waiting for Alex to respond, the man walked ahead, leading the way. Alex felt quite confused at that moment. Half of him wanted to follow, but the other half wanted to turn back. As they went deeper into the alley, about 100 meters in, Alex's eyes were drawn to an old gate. On either side hung two red lanterns, and the dim light they emitted added an eerie atmosphere to the scene.
Is it here?
That's right. Just drive in here. It may look small, but it's very spacious inside.
Looking deeper inside, all Alex could see was a vast, pitch-black space. He continued speaking.
Why is your inn so dark, sir? Doesn't anyone stay here?
The man, short and stout, with a round belly like a ball, kept his hands in the pockets of his thick coat as he replied,
It's because this place is hard to find and located far from the residential area, so it's only occasional that someone comes here to stay overnight.
Hearing this, Alex felt a bit skeptical, because if that were the case, the business wouldn't have been able to sustain itself for such a long time. As if reading Alex's thoughts, the man quickly explained,
Actually, this inn used to have many guests, but ever since the area started a demolition project, things have turned out like this. My wife and I are old now, so we're just trying to maintain it and make a living day by day.
Hearing this, Alex began to understand. Even though he didn't really want to go in, he couldn't bring himself to refuse.
Then how much do you charge for an overnight stay?
Oh, just pay whatever you can. I don't have a set price.
Alex was surprised. This was the first time he had rented a guest house and met such an unusual owner. Fearing a scam, he still suggested a price to negotiate beforehand.
Well, I'll pay you $20. Is that okay with you?
All right. Just drive in here, don't worry, I won't charge you too much.
Alex intended to ask a few more questions but decided against it after seeing the man's attitude. After getting out of the car, he glanced around and saw the house, which had 3 floors. From the condition, it was exactly as he had expected. Everything was in a severe state of decay. Surrounding the house were tall eucalyptus trees, and on the side of the house there was an old banyan tree with thick branches, casting a shadow that covered nearly half of the yard. It was hard to tell how it looked during the day, but in the dead of night, Alex couldn't shake the eerie feeling running down his spine. Even though the lights inside the house were turned on and bright, the unease and fear Alex felt didn't lessen at all. Holding the key in his hand, Alex slowly climbed the dusty staircase, where faint layers of dust remained, and noticed large cobwebs along the walls. He continued straight up to the 3rd floor, where he found a completely dark hallway. Reaching out to find the light switch, he couldn't locate it, so he had to feel his way forward, using the light from his phone's flashlight. Each step echoed loudly in the silence, the only sound Alex could hear. The noise rang out, bouncing back from the darkness, as if there were other footsteps besides his own. His room was at the very end of the hallway. Alex took a deep breath to calm himself, then slowly took the key ring and unlocked the door. The door creaked loudly as it opened, and a chilling sense of coldness quickly surrounded him. When the lights turned on, Alex was a bit surprised, as everything looked different from what he had expected. Indeed, the room was very clean, and even the plaster on the 4 walls seemed freshly painted. It was unclear if all the rooms were like this, or if it was just this one. After a long, exhausting day, even though he felt grimy and sweaty, Alex didn't care and quickly collapsed onto the bed to rest. The room's furnishings were very simple: a wardrobe, an air conditioner, an old-fashioned TV, and a small dresser. That was it. Alex couldn't expect more since this was just a budget inn in a remote area. After resting for about half an hour, he finally took out a fresh set of clothes and went to take a shower. As warm water cascaded down, Alex felt a wave of comfort and relief. His body seemed to be replenished with new energy. However, right after the soap bubbles on Alex's head were rinsed away, he opened his eyes and looked down at the ground in horror. What he saw under his feet wasn't fresh, clear water, but a deep red liquid, as if he were standing in a pool of blood. Alex screamed and jumped up, but in an instant, everything returned to normal. Looking up at the corner of the bathroom, Alex realized that the cause was the red bulb light installed inside the room. He had never seen such an arrangement in any other inn, and he couldn't understand why they would do this. Though he now understood the cause, it didn't stop him from feeling uneasy and disturbed. Despite being naked, Alex quickly grabbed the towel and rushed out. Sitting on the wooden chair next to the dresser, Alex's face still showed signs of shock. The room suddenly felt strangely gloomy, as if the very atmosphere had changed. It took Alex nearly half an hour to calm down. Though he didn't want to, he knew he had to go back into the bathroom, because there were still soap bubbles stuck to his body. Unlike before, as soon as Alex stepped in this time, goosebumps immediately covered his skin. He felt as if there were an eye lurking somewhere in the darkness, watching him intently. He reached for the shower knob and slowly turned it, but as soon as the water touched him, he was shocked by how cold it was. ice cold, like frozen stone. It seemed that the hot water in the tank had run out. Not wanting to wait any longer, Alex clenched his teeth and endured it. Already burdened with a sense of fear and unease, the cold water intensified those feelings, pushing his fear to its peak. Alex's entire body trembled uncontrollably, and even the part between his legs seemed to shrink away, completely disappearing. After rinsing off the soap, he quickly dried himself with a towel to shake off the cold. However, as he reached for the towel and glanced at his reflection in the mirror, Alex froze in shock. For a brief moment, it looked as though the reflection in the mirror wasn't him at all. It was a mess of long, disheveled hair covering an unseen face. Alex let out another scream, but the eerie image vanished just as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his own terrified face staring back at him. Whether it was a trick of his eyes or not, Alex didn't dare stay in the bathroom a second longer. He snatched the towel and bolted out like a shot, his heart pounding in his chest. Since stepping into this place, Alex had encountered one strange, inexplicable event after another. It was now clear to him that there was something very wrong about this place. After changing into fresh clothes, his phone suddenly rang. Picking it up, Alex saw the caller ID. It was John, his closest friend. Alex slowly recounted everything from the beginning, starting with encountering a strange owl when he arrived, and then all the bizarre events that had taken place in the bathroom. On the other end of the line, John couldn't help but get goosebumps as he listened. Afterward, the two continued chatting idly until around 11 p.m., when John began yawning, visibly tired. He had tried several times to end the call and go to sleep, but Alex kept pulling him back into the conversation. However, John's eyes could no longer stay open, and he had no choice but to cut the call, even if it meant leaving his best friend hanging. The beep-beep of the call ending echoed, and the room quickly returned to its oppressive silence. Looking out the window, Alex could only see a few tall, shadowy acacia trees swaying faintly in the night breeze. The thought of staying awake all night crossed his mind. He feared something terrifying might happen while he was asleep. But if he did, he'd show up to his meeting with the client tomorrow looking like a panda with dark circles under his eyes and yawning like an addict. That wouldn't exactly project a professional image. Not to mention, his foggy mind might lead him to misspeak or make poor decisions. Resolving to get some rest, Alex pulled a pair of over-ear headphones from his backpack, placed them on, and turned up the music as loud as he could, trying to force himself into sleep. He didn't dare turn off the lights, and even left the door slightly ajar. Just in case something happened, he could make a quick escape. Immersed in soft pop ballads, Alex suddenly heard a faint dripping sound, like water falling. At first, he thought it might be part of the song's melody, but it quickly became clear that it wasn't. The sound of dripping water continued steadily, drop by drop. No matter how much he turned up the volume on his headphones, the noise seemed to cut through, piercing directly into his eardrums. When Alex finally removed his headphones, the sound became even clearer, sharp and distinct. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he slowly walked toward the bathroom door. When he was just a few steps away, he froze in terror as a loud rushing noise came from inside, like someone had just turned on the faucet full blast. Before Alex could recover from the fright, the main door suddenly began to creak open slowly. Behind it, a pale, round face, white as a rice cake, peeked through. Alex screamed and stumbled backward in panic, only to realize moments later, as the door opened fully, that it was a short, plump woman waddling into the room. She had come to check in after hearing that someone had just rented a room. The woman pushed the door wider, and the light from the room spilled out, making her red coat glow even more vividly. However, for some reason, Alex couldn't shake an eerie feeling. Perhaps he was still haunted by the thought of women dressed in red appearing at night. It was then that Alex noticed something peculiar. Both this woman and the innkeeper had an unusual habit. They kept their hands tucked inside their coats almost constantly, rarely taking them out. This might have seemed normal on a freezing cold night, but the weather wasn't nearly cold enough to warrant such behavior. Though the thought unsettled him, Alex decided to keep it to himself rather than bring it up. The woman reminded Alex to lock the door tightly before going to sleep. Alex nodded gently with a smile, and the woman turned and left the room. Alex's eyes followed her until she disappeared completely, and only then did he step back inside. Suddenly, Alex felt a chill run down his spine as he recalled something peculiar. The woman had been wearing wooden clogs, yet not a single sound of her steps had reached his ears. Thinking back to when he entered the building earlier, even though he had tried to walk quietly, every step still echoed loudly. Alex muttered to himself, "Could it be something's wrong with her?" Alex didn't dare let his thoughts wander further, afraid he might conjure up even more horrifying scenarios. The fear he had experienced tonight was already overwhelming. If he continued to torment himself with his imagination, he knew he wouldn't last. Thankfully, after that, no strange sounds disturbed him anymore. All that remained was the ticking of the clock, its soft but persistent rhythm making time crawl by, unbearably slow and heavy. But peace didn't last long. Before he realized it, his eyelids began to twitch slightly, and then, faintly in his ears, he could hear it, someone singing. It was the voice of a woman, sorrowful and haunting, carrying a melancholic and lamenting melody. At this moment, Alex's eyes were fully open, but his entire body remained frozen, unwilling to move even the slightest bit. He was terrified of making a sound, terrified that whoever, or whatever, was singing might realize he was there. It was impossible to tell how much time had passed before the singing gradually faded and disappeared completely. By then, Alex was drenched in sweat, his face pale as a sheet from fear. He felt as though he was suffocating, and only then did he slowly lower the blanket that was covering his head. But Alex had to pull it right back up immediately. This time it wasn't singing. Now it was laughter. A chilling laugh, like that of a heartbroken lunatic, reckless, deranged, and horrifying. These unsettling, ghostly sounds kept tormenting Alex, second after second, minute after minute. Perhaps in his entire life, Alex had never experienced fear as paralyzing as this. "You little brat! What the hell are you mumbling and singing about in the middle of the night? I'm coming up there to teach you a lesson." Though the voice wasn't particularly loud and echoed from the floor below, Alex could clearly recognize it. It was the voice of the innkeeper who had led him to this room. After the angry shouting, the eerie singing stopped immediately, replaced by the wailing cries of a girl, as if someone was dragging her away. Moments later, Alex heard the voice of the innkeeper's wife, seemingly trying to stop her husband from beating the girl. "Stop it, will you? She's still our child. If she does something wrong, we can teach her gently. You keep yelling and hitting her every day. She's going to become withdrawn and depressed. This is all your fault. You spoil her too much. Never discipline her properly. If you can't handle it, then I will." A loud slap echoed through the air, so sharp that Alex could hear it clearly, even from upstairs. The girl's cries grew even more heart-wrenching. Though Alex couldn't see what was happening, he could vaguely imagine the grim scene unfolding downstairs. The loud commotion in the middle of the night made it impossible for Alex to fall back asleep. After lowering the blanket, he slowly opened the door again and stepped outside. The sounds grew even clearer, and Alex cautiously moved step by step toward the source downstairs. Perhaps Alex did this mostly out of curiosity rather than any real intention to intervene. After all, it was their family matter. He didn't know the full story, so who was he to step in and offer advice? Once he reached the first floor, Alex hid behind a column and listened. Strangely, what had been a chaotic noise just moments ago had now gone completely silent in the most inexplicable way. Once again, Alex found himself dumbfounded, unable to figure out what had just happened. He even muttered under his breath to himself, "How odd. Could I have been dreaming earlier?" Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Alex cautiously moved closer to the room where the commotion had been. Dim light spilled faintly out from the room, and with every step he took, the cold, eerie sensation crawling up his spine grew more intense.
Who are you? What are you doing here sneaking around at night?
Alex's hands and legs were still trembling, and his dazed expression couldn't hide his fear.
Who... who are you?
I am the daughter of the landlord. You must be the one who rented the room, right?
That's right. But earlier, I heard loud arguing down here. When I came down, there was nothing. What happened?
The girl's face showed a hint of surprise.
What are you talking about? I haven't heard anything this whole time. Maybe you misheard?
No, I'm certain I heard voices and I even heard singing. Were you out on the balcony earlier, singing?
No, I wasn't. You probably heard Asley's voice instead. This is a long story. A while back, after a major emotional shock, her mind suddenly became unstable. Every now and then, late at night, she goes out to the balcony, singing and rambling to herself. That behavior has been affecting the inn's business, which has made my dad very upset and frustrated.
The two talked for quite a while before Alex excused himself to return to his room. Quietly walking back, he glanced over his shoulder and saw the girl still standing there, her eyes gazing up at the sky, filled with a sense of melancholy. Back in his room, Alex glanced at the clock. It was already close to 2 a.m. Unlike earlier in the evening, his overwhelming drowsiness had now completely vanished. He lay back on the bed, his eyes vacant and unfocused. Although the girl had answered many of his questions earlier, there were still countless unresolved doubts lingering in his mind. Everyone he had encountered in this house carried an air of mystery, something strange and inexplicable. Even the stories and the sounds, they came and went so suddenly with no warning. All of it spun Alex's thoughts like a whirlwind, leaving him lost and unsure of what was real and what wasn't. As he drifted in a haze of chaotic thoughts, he was suddenly jolted back to reality by the loud honking of a car outside the inn's gate. It wasn't clear exactly who these people were, but honking the horn so loudly in the middle of the night was certainly rude and uncivilized. From inside, the innkeeper quickly ran out, his voice sounding irritated. "What are you doing honking like crazy in the middle of the night? You could have just called out." The two black cars showed no signs of stopping right away. They drove straight into the yard, all the way to the front of the inn's entrance, before finally coming to a halt and parking carelessly in the way. Seeing this, the innkeeper grew even more annoyed. He knocked forcefully on the car window and yelled, "Why are you parking your cars here? This is the walkway. Move them over to the parking area." The glass windows slowly rolled down, revealing a rough-looking man with a fierce, intimidating face. He leaned out and glared at the innkeeper. "Shut your mouth, old man. Stop whining. We'll park here if we want to, got it?" Seeing the man's expression and attitude, the innkeeper quickly realized these were not people to mess with. Swallowing his anger, he softened his tone. "Oh, yes, of course. Are you here to rent a room?" "What else would we be here for? Stop asking stupid questions. Get us 2 VIP rooms ready right now." "Yes, of course. Right away. Please, step out of the car." When all of them got out of the cars, the innkeeper counted a total of 7 men. Each one had a rough, intimidating face, and they reeked of alcohol. Among them was one man dressed in all white, standing out from the rest. Even without asking, the innkeeper could guess this man was likely their leader. It seemed he was heavily intoxicated, as his eyes were nearly shut, and he needed 2 men to help him up the stairs. Whether by coincidence or on purpose, the innkeeper assigned them 2 rooms right next to Alex's. This made Alex feel uneasy and anxious. As soon as he heard them coming up the stairs, he quickly rushed to lock the door and turn off all the lights in his room. Being alone here, completely defenseless, he couldn't help but worry. If anything unfortunate were to happen during the night, there'd be no one to save him. Since Alex's room was right next door and incredibly quiet, he could hear almost everything they were saying. This time, Michael didn't come in person and handed it over to Jack, which has caused us so much trouble, one of them grumbled. Another sighed and replied, "Well, we've got to let him prove himself, right? Like father, like son. If you keep him locked up in a cage, how's he ever going to become king of the jungle?" "You've got a point, but they should have let him handle smaller deals first. This one's way too big. What if something goes wrong?" Before he could finish, another cut him off. "Shut your damn mouth. You think Michael's an idiot? Jack's just a decoy on this trip, a formality. Everything's already been arranged." "Yeah, sure, everyone knows that. But I'm just worried that if something unexpected happens, Jack doesn't have the experience to handle it." "Then what the hell are you and I here for? Anyway, I don't think anything will happen. I'm gonna catch a nap for now." Lying in the room next door, even though Alex could only catch bits and pieces of their conversation, cold sweat began to form on his forehead. If his suspicions were correct, these men were likely part of the underworld, planning a highly dangerous operation. Alex was 90% certain it involved illegal contraband. Regular gangsters were already people Alex wanted no part of, but these individuals seemed far more dangerous. Alex was convinced that if they detected any threat, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate it ruthlessly. Fate had somehow placed Alex in this perilous situation during what was supposed to be a routine work trip. One small misstep, and his life could be over. Even if he managed to get through the night unscathed, this experience would undoubtedly become an unforgettable memory in his life. The ticking of the clock grew heavier and more ominous. Alex's anxiety and fear only heightened compared to earlier. Ghosts and spirits might be terrifying, but they were nothing compared to the danger posed by the men on the other side of the wall. For over an hour, Alex heard no sounds from the other room. It seemed as though they had all fallen into a deep sleep. The thought of sneaking away in the middle of the night crossed Alex's mind, but the risk of making noise and waking them kept him frozen in hesitation. After debating with himself for what felt like an eternity, Alex finally decided to make a move. If he didn't leave now and they discovered someone was staying in the room next door come morning, it would surely spell trouble for him. However, just as one foot touched the floor, Alex's heart skipped a beat. A voice suddenly rang out from the room next door. "I want a girl to serve me." "Where are you guys? Go get me a girl right now. Hurry up." In the next room, Alex froze like someone had been struck by a spell, stuck in the position of one foot on the bed and the other on the floor, unable to move a muscle. "Mr. Jack, you're awake. I told you to bring me a girl. What are you rambling about? Hurry up." "Sir, you've had quite a bit to drink tonight. It's best to rest. We have important business to take care of tomorrow morning." "You little bastard, are you trying to argue with me? Do you want me to deal with you right now?" The other voice now sounded flustered. "No, sir, I wouldn't dare. Please wait here for a moment. I'll go get a girl for you." "Hurry up. I'm dying here. I can't wait any longer." The next moment there was the sound of a door opening, followed by heavy footsteps stomping hurriedly away. Instinctively, Alex felt a surge of worry. He feared for Tui, the innkeeper's daughter, wondering if she might get dragged into trouble. However, as much as he was concerned, there was no way he'd dare to step out of his room at a time like this. Those men could kill him as easily as swatting a mosquito, and if he were lucky enough to survive, he'd probably end up missing a limb or two. Even from the third floor, Alex could clearly hear one of the men shouting, "Innkeeper! Where the hell are you? Get over here now! We've got a task for you!" The innkeeper's voice, tinged with worry, responded nervously. Yes, what do you need? That's right. Call up the best girl you can find and get her here now. And listen, our boss is in no mood to wait. If he's not satisfied, I'm afraid your little inn here won't be running much longer. Hearing this, the innkeeper's voice wavered with fear. Ah, about that. I'm sorry, but we don't offer that kind of service here. Perhaps you could try somewhere else? At this, the thug's voice rose sharply in anger. What the hell did you just say? Running an inn without that service? What kind of joke is this? You might as well shut the whole place down. I'm giving you 10 minutes. If you can't get someone here by then, you'll deal with the consequences. The man didn't give the innkeeper a chance to explain himself. He immediately turned and stormed up the stairs. Faced with their overbearing and aggressive behavior, the innkeeper was at a loss for what to do. He knew they weren't bluffing. If he failed to meet their demands, there was no doubt they wouldn't let him off easily. He thought about calling the police but hesitated, worrying about the potential repercussions. While law enforcement might protect his family this time, such an action would likely provoke the gang's anger, and their retaliation in the future could be even more severe. The innkeeper was trapped in an incredibly difficult situation. The 10 minutes of uneasy calm passed, and soon he found himself face to face with one of the men, whose expression was filled with anger. The man shouted, "Do you think I'm joking? Are you testing my patience? Do you not value your safety?" Terrified, the innkeeper quickly tried to explain, Please, you misunderstood. I would never think that, but I truly don't offer that kind of service here, and I don't even know who to call. I'm begging you." Begging. That's not going to help you. Before the innkeeper could finish, the man stepped forward and forcefully pushed him backward, causing him to fall to the floor. The innkeeper curled up in pain, trying to shield himself. Even so, the man continued to berate him harshly, making it clear he wasn't satisfied with the response. The innkeeper's wife, a robust and determined woman, rushed out of the room at that moment and shouted, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Leave him alone!" As she approached, the man turned and lashed out, causing her to stumble backward. She fell to the floor, visibly shaken. The commotion quickly drew the attention of the couple's 2 daughters, who hurried out of their rooms to see what was happening. Seeing the intimidating figure standing there, both daughters were visibly alarmed. One of them mustered the courage to speak up. "Stop this right now. If you don't, I'll call the police." The man, who had been about to take another aggressive step toward the wife, froze momentarily. He turned his gaze to the young woman who had spoken, his eyes narrowing as if evaluating her with unwelcome intensity. Then he gave a sly, unsettling grin and said, "Well, well, looks like there's a solution here after all. Why didn't you mention this earlier?" The innkeeper, still struggling to get up from the floor, clasped his hands together in desperation and pleaded, "Please, I beg you, these are my daughters. Leave them out of this." The man shot him a sharp glare and snapped, "Keep your mouth shut, old man, or you'll regret it." Then, turning to the daughters, he said with a chilling smirk, "So, what do you say, ladies? Are you willing to help your parents out of this mess?" Looking at the man's demeanor, it was clear to the sisters what his intentions were. The younger sister, trembling with fear, hid behind her elder sister. Though equally frightened, the elder sister tried to maintain a brave front and confronted him. "What do you want? Don't you realize that your actions are against the law?" The man burst into a mocking laugh and said, "Law? You think the law scares us? How naive. Ha!" Then his tone turned cold and menacing. "Listen carefully. If you cooperate, everything will be fine. Who knows? The boss might even reward you handsomely. But if you don't, well, let's just say you won't like the outcome." It was clear that he wasn't offering them any real choice: comply or face the consequences. At that moment, 3 more men descended from upstairs. One of them, appearing to be in charge, asked, "What's taking so long?" This should have been handled already. The first man quickly responded, pointing toward the sisters. I've got it sorted, boss. What do you think about these two? The new arrival glanced at the sisters with a predatory smirk and nodded. Not bad. Better than expected. Are they clean? Of course, boss. These two are the innkeeper's daughters. The leader clapped his hands and grinned. Perfect. Let's not waste any more time. Bring them upstairs. The boss will go first, and then we'll see. Immediately, the men rushed forward, grabbing the sisters by their arms and dragging them away roughly. Despite the desperate cries and pleas from the innkeepers, the men remained unmoved. When the couple tried to intervene, they were met with harsh blows that left them crumpled on the floor in pain. In the room, Jack, still groggy from drinking, suddenly lit up with excitement at the sight of the two young women. Not bad at all. You guys did a good job this time. Once this is over, I'll make sure to reward you big, he said, stepping toward the older sister with a menacing demeanor. Though she tried to stay calm and resist, the situation quickly spiraled into a dire one. In the adjacent room, Alex could hear everything clearly. His face turned red with anger, and his hands clenched tightly, trembling with rage. The unforgivable actions of these men filled him with disgust and fury. Although the sisters were strangers to him, witnessing such injustice tore at his conscience. However, Alex knew that acting recklessly could put his own life at risk, which would do no good for anyone. After weighing his options, he decided to discreetly call the police. He retreated to the bathroom, whispering into his phone to describe the situation, ensuring the men couldn't overhear him. Even as he tried to stay focused on the call, the horrifying sounds from the next room kept piercing through the walls. The men's cruel laughter and the desperate cries for help from the sisters only fueled Alex's determination. He knew his actions might be the only hope to save them from this nightmare. Alex's rage surged like a boiling storm, making it almost impossible for him to breathe. His chest felt tight and his fists trembled with fury. At that moment, if someone had handed him an AK rifle, he might have stormed into the other room and emptied the entire clip without a second thought. Suddenly, Alex's phone rang, making his heart nearly stop. He scrambled to mute the phone as quickly as he could, tightly covering the speaker before turning it off completely. The near miss left him on the verge of collapsing. If the men in the next room had heard the sound, he knew there was no way he would survive the night. Thankfully, the noises from the other room continued uninterrupted, screams and cries of the two sisters growing louder with each passing second. Now there were additional sounds, shouts, insults, and even the thuds of blows coming from the lower floor. You want to live? Then sit still and shut up. Say one more word and I'll slit your throat. Please, I beg you, spare my daughters. You can hit me, beat me, do whatever you want to me, but don't hurt them. Thud. A loud crash echoed through the building, so sharp and jarring that Alex could hear it clearly even from the third floor. It sounded like someone's head had slammed hard against a wall. Darling, oh my God, wake up. Please, wake up. Darling, don't leave me. The motel owner now lay on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. After the brutal slam into the wall, his head felt like it had been split in two. No matter how much his wife shook him, he showed no reaction. Even the subtle rise and fall of his chest from breathing had ceased. The motel owner's wife could no longer contain her emotions. She lunged at the man responsible, grabbing him by the collar and yanking with all her strength. But how could her frail body stand a chance against him? He responded by landing a bone-crushing punch to her face and then grabbing her head, slamming it repeatedly into the floor. The sickening, sharp sounds echoed through the walls, making Alex shudder as goosebumps ran down his spine. Each strike felt like a drumbeat pounding directly into his skull. His body froze, paralyzed with fear and dread. Then, all of a sudden, everything went silent. A suffocating stillness blanketed the air, a silence that spoke of loss and death. Sensing the grim turn of events, the older sister summoned every ounce of strength she had left, thrashing and struggling against Jack. With one final, desperate push, she managed to shove him off her. One of the men standing guard at the door was caught off guard and failed to stop her as she darted out of the room. The sister bolted down the stairs, her heart racing. But as she reached the lower floor, the sight of the two lifeless bodies lying in a pool of blood rooted her to the spot, her entire body stiff with shock and horror. "Dad, Mom, Dad, please!" The older sister rushed forward, throwing herself onto their lifeless bodies. She clung to them, shaking them desperately, but no matter how much she called out or how hard she tried to rouse them, they didn't respond. At that moment, the group of men chasing her arrived, but before they could grab her, she darted toward the front desk, yanked open a drawer, and pulled out a folding knife. "If any of you dare come near, I'll kill you." She pointed the knife toward them, her eyes blazing with unrelenting fury. The raw intensity in her gaze and her fearless stance made the men hesitate. None of them dared make a move right away. For a tense minute, the room was silent, as though both sides were calculating their next steps. Then, from the distance, Jack approached. His hand was gripping the younger sister's hair, dragging her across the floor as if she were a lifeless rag doll. He looked at the older sister and said coldly, "You'd better drop that knife. Be a good girl and do what I say, or I promise neither of you will leave here alive today." "Shut up," she screamed. "You've already killed my parents. Even if I have to die, I'll take you all down with me." Jack's lips curled into a cruel smirk. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to talk her down. But instead, without a word, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a knife of his own, and with a swift motion, plunged it straight into the younger sister's side. A hot gush of blood sprayed from the wound, staining Jack's arm crimson. The younger sister let out a piercing scream of agony before her head slumped forward, her body going limp. Jack wasn't done. He pulled the knife out and began stabbing the younger sister repeatedly, over and over again. As he plunged the blade into her body, he let out a series of manic, gleeful laughs. It wasn't until her body was riddled with gaping wounds, blood pooling beneath her lifeless form, that he finally stopped. Turning his gaze toward the older sister, he sneered, "This is your fault. You're the one who killed her, not me. You filthy bastard, I'm going to kill you." The older sister had lost all control. Screaming in pure rage, she charged straight at Jack like someone consumed by madness. Her knife was aimed directly at his throat, her intentions unmistakable. But her goal was a fool's hope. Jack was surrounded by layers of his lackeys, forming a human barrier. Before she could even get within 2 meters of him, a baton came crashing down on the back of her head. Her grip on the knife faltered instantly, the weapon clattering to the ground. Her body followed, collapsing like a felled tree. But they didn't stop there. The gang surrounded her, raining blow after blow down on her skull. The sound of each strike echoed like the sickening crack of breaking wood. By the time they finally stopped, her head was unrecognizable, twisted, deformed, and horrifyingly shattered. In some places, the white of her brain was visible through the crimson mess. From the distance, Alex had stepped out of his hiding spot. His eyes were fixed on the grisly scene. A gang of thugs stood over the battered remains of 2 defenseless women, drunk on their cruelty. Alex's blood boiled. After everything had been taken care of, one of Jack's lackeys hesitantly spoke up. "So, boss, what do we do with the bodies now?" Jack, lighting a cigar with calm indifference, exhaled a puff of smoke before replying nonchalantly, "Cut up the parents' bodies into pieces. Dump each piece in a different spot. As for the 2 sisters, take them up to my room. Take them up there, but they're already dead." Jack's expression darkened, his eyes glinting with menace. "Since when was that your concern? Question me again and I'll cut your tongue out. Just do as you're told." The lackey paled, stammering his acknowledgement before rushing to carry out the orders. As the two sisters' lifeless bodies were dragged away, the sickening sounds of chopping soon followed. Thud, thud. Each blow was unmistakable as the parents' bodies were dismembered piece by piece. Alex stood frozen, utterly horrified. His legs felt weak, trembling as though they could give out at any moment. The gruesome scene unfolding before his eyes left him utterly traumatized. Unable to stomach any more, Alex quickly retreated to his room, his mind racing. He knew that once the lackeys finished their grisly work, they'd be back. But what Jack did next was beyond anything Alex could have imagined. The sisters' corpses weren't taken up to his room for any practical reason. Jack was no ordinary monster. He was something far worse, a depraved, grotesque abomination. Even in death, his victims weren't safe from his twisted desires. Jack continued his depraved, heinous acts with the two lifeless bodies, stopping only when he seemed to have completely exhausted himself. The scene was so vile that even his hardened lackeys couldn't suppress the chills running down their spines. Compared to his notorious father, a long-established crime lord, Jack was far more brutal and monstrous in every conceivable way. Hours of mental torment had left Alex completely drained, both physically and emotionally. His entire body felt heavy, as though he were on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, Jack's voice boomed from the other room, sending a jolt of terror through Alex. "Now, drag those two bodies into the room next door." The words struck Alex like a lightning bolt, sending him plummeting into a bottomless pit of despair. He shot upright like a spring, eyes darting around the room in sheer panic, desperately searching for a hiding spot. His mind raced as he silently prayed that the room Jack referred to wasn't his. But fate, it seemed, had abandoned Alex. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed louder and louder, growing closer with each passing second. His breathing quickened as the weight of impending doom pressed down on him. In an instant, Alex made his decision. Grabbing all of his belongings, he stuffed them into his backpack as fast as he could. Without a second thought, he slid under the bed, pressing himself tightly against the floor, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps were just outside now, accompanied by a chilling sound, the unmistakable scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The door creaked open, and at that moment Alex's heart felt like it had stopped entirely. Alex clasped his hands tightly over his mouth, sweat pouring from his body like a waterfall. At this moment, even the slightest mistake could send him on a one-way trip off the face of the earth. The first body was dragged straight into the bathroom by one of the lackeys. From its shape, Alex could tell it wasn't the older sister. However, for some inexplicable reason, they didn't take the second body into the bathroom. Instead, they dumped it right next to the bed, barely half a meter away from where Alex was hiding. Alex nearly let out a scream of terror but managed to suppress it. The sight of the older sister's body was utterly horrifying. Her head was so disfigured and misshapen, it barely resembled a human's anymore. The only thing that remained intact were her bloodshot, wide-open eyes, staring directly at Alex. He could only bear to look for a few seconds before he had to turn away, fearing he might lose control and cry out. Bad luck seemed to be Alex's constant companion, as the two thugs didn't leave the room right away. Instead, they plopped themselves down, making themselves comfortable. At first, Alex had no idea what they were doing, but it quickly became clear. They were dividing up some white powder and lighting it up to snort. One of them squatted right next to the older sister's corpse, his backside practically in Alex's face, no more than half a meter away. After getting high, one of them slumped down, sprawled on the floor with his back leaning against the bed frame, and said, "This stuff hits hard, man. Feels like it's way better than the last batch." "I know, right? This seems purer, way stronger. Man, if only we could get stuff like this every day. That'd be the dream." "Keep dreaming. This is the premium stuff. It costs way more than the usual junk. Michael only gives us a little now and then as a treat." The two of them continued rambling, their conversations spiraling into nonsensical chatter, typical of junkies deep in their high. Though Alex was growing increasingly anxious, he felt a strange sense of relief. If these guys stayed this high, they weren't as much of a threat. It was when they were sober that Alex had the most to fear. But Alex's luck never seemed to hold. After their drug-fueled rambling, instead of heading back to their room, the two thugs passed out on the floor right where they were. Sprawled out and snoring loudly, they seemed completely oblivious to the world around them. Alex remained frozen under the bed, his position unchanged for hours. His entire body ached, drained of strength. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and his head drooped, allowing sleep to claim him without his even realizing it. He had no idea how much time had passed when a sudden noise jolted him awake. His head slammed into the underside of the bed frame, sending a sharp jolt of pain through his skull. Echoing in his ears was a blaring alarm-like sound, reminiscent of the wailing siren of an ambulance. It took Alex a few seconds to piece together his memory as it slowly returned. His eyes darted around the room frantically, searching for any sign of them. But no matter how many times he scanned the area, there was nothing. Even the body, just moments ago lying so grotesquely near him, was nowhere to be seen. This baffled Alex, leaving him utterly stunned and unable to comprehend what had happened. Slowly, he peeked his head out, ensuring that the people who had been in the room were no longer there. Once confident they were gone, he carefully tiptoed toward the door, opened it, and stepped outside. Looking down into the courtyard of the motel, Alex's heart nearly stopped. Several police cars had pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the area. A group of officers dressed in full uniform, armed with guns, had taken up strategic positions. The voice of a commanding officer boomed through a megaphone, sharp and commanding as it echoed across the scene. "Everyone inside the building, listen up. This place is surrounded. Raise your hands above your head and step out slowly." The officer's stern voice repeated the command, growing more urgent with every iteration. Alex knew he couldn't afford to delay. Panicked, he hurriedly complied, stepping forward with his hands raised high in the air. As soon as the officers spotted him coming down, they immediately turned their guns on him. The cold steel barrels pointed directly at him froze him in place, making it clear he couldn't afford even the smallest misstep. Not until they confirmed that Alex posed no danger did the group lower their weapons. A man stepped forward and asked, "Who are you and why are you here?" "My name is Alex, sir. I was the one who called the police earlier." "So it was you. Then why didn't you pick up when we tried calling you back?" "Sir, the situation was dangerous at the time. I was afraid answering the call would get me discovered." "I see. Now tell us what exactly happened here and where the people you mentioned are." Alex quickly recounted everything that had occurred. After listening, Officer Brian, the team leader, was stunned. "What? Are you saying that a massacre took place here last night?" "Yes, sir. I swear everything I've said is the truth. If even a single word of mine is a lie, I will take full responsibility before the law." Officer Brian stared directly at Alex with a peculiar expression, not one of suspicion about Alex lying, but as if he was questioning whether Alex's mind was functioning properly. "Do you realize what you're saying? Everyone in that family died several years ago. Since then, this house has been abandoned, with no one living here." Alex's jaw dropped at Officer Brian's words. "That's impossible. That can't be true. I'm sure of it. I clearly saw them alive yesterday. The owner of this guest house was the one who led me here. He even had 2 daughters. Last night, they were brutally murdered. I saw it with my own eyes." Hearing Alex's statement, it was now Officer Brian's turn to be astonished, as he did know that the owners of the house had 2 daughters. "What did you say? You actually saw them being killed? Are you sure about this?" Yes, sir, I saw it clearly. I even know the leader of the group. His name is Jack, and I think his father's name is Michael. If I'm not mistaken, they were preparing for some big operation, possibly smuggling illegal goods. At this point, Officer Brian quickly interrupted Alex and stopped him from saying more. Then he pulled Alex aside to a quieter spot. If you're not busy, I'd like to invite you to the station for a private discussion. This matter is extremely serious, and we need your cooperation. What do you mean, sir? Do you suspect that I'm somehow involved in this case? Officer Brian shook his head. You've misunderstood me, Officer Brian clarified. We fully believe that you're innocent. It's just that what you've described is related to a major criminal case from several years ago. To this day, the perpetrator has not been caught. If you can provide more clues, we might finally be able to find them. Hearing this, Alex looked confused. A major case? I don't understand. What case are you talking about? It's the very case you just mentioned, Brian explained. However, the incident didn't happen last night as you claimed. It happened several years ago. But what you've just revealed matches perfectly with the details of that case. That's why I'd like to invite you to the station for further questioning to clarify everything. A chill ran down Alex's spine as he listened to Officer Brian's words. At this point, there was no more doubt. What Brian said was undoubtedly true. But the events Alex witnessed last night couldn't be false either. So what on earth was going on? Alex's mind spun in confusion, unsure of what was real and what wasn't. The only explanation that made sense to him was that he had encountered ghosts the night before. Interestingly, Officer Brian seemed to have the same thought. However, he chose not to say it out loud. Reluctantly, Alex had to call and postpone his business trip in order to cooperate with Officer Brian's investigation. When they arrived at the station, Alex recounted in detail everything that had occurred the night before at the Peace Motel. Officer Brian listened intently from start to finish, not missing a single word. Beads of sweat began forming on his forehead, even though the two were sitting in a comfortably air-conditioned room. The account Alex provided was too vivid, detailed, and logical. Brian couldn't find a single inconsistency in his story, which meant it couldn't simply be baseless fabrication. What truly baffled him was how Alex could know so much about the events of that old case in such astonishing detail. Afterward, Officer Brian handed Alex a stack of photographs of potential suspects. Alex took the photos and flipped through them one by one. When he reached the 8th or 9th picture, his hands suddenly began to tremble. His face went pale as he stared at the photograph. It was none other than Jack, the sadistic and deranged criminal. Alex would never, for the rest of his life, forget that man. It's him! It's definitely him! That's Jack, the most despicable person I've ever encountered. Officer Brian calmly asked again, Are you sure? You need to understand that your words right now must not contain any mistakes. I'm 100% certain. Even if he were reduced to ashes, I'd still recognize him. All right, this time we trust you. Please leave your contact information and we'll reach out to you if needed. For now, you're free to go. A few months after finishing his business trip, Alex unexpectedly received a phone call from Officer Brian. Hello, is this Alex? Yes, it is. Who's calling? This is Brian. I'm calling today on behalf of the police force to express our deepest gratitude to you. Thanks to the information you provided, we were able to solve the old case at the Peace Motel. After consulting with our leadership, we've decided to award you a certificate of merit. We can have someone deliver it to your home, or if you prefer, we can present it during a special event, so more people can know about your contribution. On the other end of the line, Alex was both excited and nervous as he replied, in that case, just send it to my house. There's no need for any grand recognition or publicity. I really didn't do much. I just said what I saw. All right, we'll respect your wishes. If you're curious to learn more, check today's latest news. Search for The Peace Inn Massacre and the horrifying secrets uncovered, and you'll find everything. Okay, I'll hang up now. Take care. Alex quickly grabbed his phone and opened the news site. A striking headline popped up with a long list of comments below it, showing just how much attention the story had drawn from the community. The ringleader had received the highest sentence, execution. However, what shocked Alex even more was another detail. After committing the crimes, Jack inexplicably descended into madness, his mind completely unhinged. Even though his father took him to every hospital, both inside and outside the country, no one could determine the cause of his condition. Day and night, he locked himself in his room, muttering and laughing to himself. Over time, his illness worsened. At this point, he developed a bizarre and grotesque habit, drinking his own blood. One day, his father accidentally walked into his room and was utterly horrified by what he saw. He was using a sharp knife to repeatedly slash his own body, catching the dripping blood with his hand and licking it as if it were a delicacy. At that moment, he looked no different from a demon. His father was so terrified he nearly fainted. Later, to prevent him from harming himself further, his father had no choice but to chain him tightly to a pillar in the house. At mealtimes, he would bring food and water for him. Caring for him was no different from looking after a wild animal. And then the fateful day finally came for the father and son. The son was sentenced to death, while the father received a life sentence in prison. It was the end of the line for a once notorious crime lord. Back to the present, the cigarette in Alex's hand had burned out, and the coffee cup next to him had been empty for quite some time. Glancing at his watch, he noticed it was nearly midnight. Stretching, Alex stood up and headed to bed. That night, he dreamt of them again. But this time, there were radiant smiles on their faces. The four of them waved at Alex, as if saying goodbye, and then walked hand in hand into a blinding white light. Their figures grew smaller and smaller until they completely vanished. The bright light faded as well, leaving Alex staring at nothing but the desolate, cold image of the abandoned guest house.